The process of neck elongation takes a lot of dedication and can be quite painful, which is enough to make many people wonder why anyone would want to go through the process. But in some areas of the world, the practice of neck elongation is deeply rooted in tradition and has enormous cultural significance. So, today we're uncovering some facts about the ancient tradition of neck elongation. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, we'd be much obliged if you'd leave a comment and let us know what other cultural practices you would like to hear about. Okay, here we go. A long neck is considered a sign of beauty in many Western cultures. Exercise to lengthen and tone the neck are common, as are cosmetic surgeries to do the same. But despite all this, the practice of neck elongation, which is common in parts of Southeast Asia and Africa, has often seemed bizarre to Westerners. People who accept things like piercings or tattoos as normal and attractive are, at the same time, sometimes weirded out by the perceived extremes of neck elongation. But even though the elongation of the neck with rings may appear somewhat unusual, it's a reminder that forms of body modification happen all over the world and in an incredible variety of cultures. The practice of neck elongation has been around in Southeast Asia for over 1,000 years. Historians have traced the cosmetic procedure all the way back to the 11th century, and many suspect that it probably goes much further back. In the past, the rings that facilitate the modification were likely worn as a rite of passage or a sign of wealth. But today, the rings are often worn to merely continue the ancient tradition. However, neck elongation isn't always a cultural practice. It has been adopted by the body modification community. For example, Los Angeles resident Sidney V. Smith used 11 copper rings to create the effect of having an 11-inch long neck. After becoming inspired by the tribal women she saw in National Geographic, Smith spent a long time debating whether neck elongation was really right for her. In an interview with the Huffington Post, she said, "After a few years, it became obvious that my neck was longer than the other girls, but not freakishly. So I stopped for a while to consider if being a long-necked woman was what I really wanted." She ultimately decided it was, and had her own coils fitted. As in the case with the origins of so many ancient traditions, the exact reasons why neck elongation became a thing are lost to history. However, there are many theories. Some tribal mythologies claim that neck rings started out as a defense against tiger bites, the idea being that tigers, like vampires, often attack the necks of their victims, and the presence of big, heavy rings would protect the vulnerable jugulars of the women who wore them. Unlike vampires, tigers can't fly, yet. While it's cool to think the rings could have been some sort of armor, it's hard to imagine they would really be a viable defense against an angry tiger, but it is one theory. Another theory suggests that women began stretching their own necks to make themselves less attractive to slave traders. Given the association between neck elongation and beauty, this explanation feels like a stretch. Pun intended. There are probably easier, faster, and less painful ways women could have made themselves appear less attractive, but the theory can't be ruled out entirely. Still, other historians believe that neck elongation rings were originally worn as a status symbol in Southeast Asian Badon tribes, which is often the case with jewelry body modification. But the most commonly accepted explanation is that the long neck is a sign of beauty and wealth. So a woman who's got one is more likely to attract a good husband. There is no one single way to elongate the neck. For instance, young giraffes just wait. But the stretching process usually involves a person wearing a number of ring-like collars. And if you think those collars are just some light cosmetic affectation, think again. The devices are quite heavy. A typical ring weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.5 pounds. And the heaviest can weigh in at an astounding 20 pounds. That's like wearing several textbooks as a necklace. In other words, it's a lot of weight for anyone to carry on their neck. In groups like the Badon tribe of Southeast Asia, girls start wearing the rings as young as 5 years old. Neck elongation begins with a simple little brass collar, but the real changes happen slowly over the years. As the girl grows, more and more rings are added to her neck, which incrementally creates the stretching effect. Although they are called rings, the devices are actually coils, and are usually made from gold or brass alloys. The coils stretch the neck to a point, after which they are removed and replaced with increasingly longer coils. In some tribes, women even look forward to this changing of the rings because it's one of the only opportunities they ever get to take a gander at their own necks. But, despite the name, neck elongation does not actually make the neck any longer. Trying to actually stretch a person's neck is fatal 9 times out of 10. What neck elongation does is make the neck appear longer. The weight of the coils presses down on the collarbone and, in turn, the rib cage, compressing them. This is one of the reasons children are usually subjected to the practice starting at such a young age. Their bones get less malleable as they grow older. It's nature's way of saying, if you want to deform someone's body, you have to start when they're little and powerless and lack judgment and reason. Whatever you might think of the aesthetics or cultural significance of a long neck, one thing is certain. The bodily changes caused by the neck elongation process can be quite severe. The weight of the neck rings pushes the clavicle and rib cage down to roughly 45 degrees below their normal position. That's a lot of degrees off from where it wants to be. It causes the shoulders to slope downward as well. So it's not something to be undertaken lightly. Obviously, a woman who has had her headstock stretched has to make some corresponding life adjustments. For starters, she has to protect her neck. Neck rings can grow hot, which, as you can probably imagine, isn't good for the neck. They also require the regular use of cloth wraps or ointments to protect against chafing. Women in neck rings also have to drink through straws because, much like sports mascots, they can't lean their heads back. And carrying around the extra weight that comes from the brass rings isn't easy, especially on an area as sensitive as the neck. Even with diligent care, the skin covered by the rings frequently chafes and bruises, and can even appear discolored. Wearing neck rings for prolonged periods of time can also impact the vocal folds. Women with elongated necks are said to have deeper voices. While many women think that wearing the rings is worth the sacrifice and feel like the rings are an important part of who they are, those who remove them may see some of the associated side effects disappear within a few days. While the spiral coils used in neck elongation can cause discomfort while they're being worn, they can also cause more than a few problems when they're taken off, sort of like a hat made of crabs. For example, the muscles in the neck will likely be weakened because they haven't been propping up the head. The rings have. And some problems can even be more severe. One woman discovered scars and mold growing on her neck after she removed her rings. While some younger tribal women may choose to remove their neck rings, it's not something every woman chooses to do. In fact, in some cultures, the removal of rings is considered a punishment, and sometimes a very painful one. According to the Peoples of the World Foundation, in some places, adultery is punished by the removal of the rings. Since your neck muscles would have been severely weakened after years of not supporting your head, you may be doomed to spending the rest of your life lying down and watching ELF reruns. At least, theoretically. In addition to the more severe cases, there are reports of women adjusting to the removal of the rings within a few hours. So it's unclear to what extent rapid removal would damage the human body, but the possibility is more than enough. In 1962, the military seized control in Burma, or modern-day Myanmar. The forces responsible for the coup wanted to modernize their society, and the pursuit of that goal allowed for steps like eradicating groups with primitive customs like neck elongation. Many Badong tribes fled to Thailand in response. Badong women in Thailand practicing neck elongation had become a huge tourist attraction, which is kind of weird. Even though some of the women may wear neck rings by choice, the United Nations has expressed concern that they are being kept in a human zoo, which does sound like something everyone should be concerned about. There's at least one Twilight Zone episode about that. The situation is further complicated by the fact that the Thai officials and the UN disagree about whether these women are refugees. Many aspects of these women's lives are subject to the interests of the tourism industry. Some reports even claim that the women are punished for doing anything that could be perceived as modern, such as using a cell phone, because it detracts from their traditional image. One woman told Marie Claire, "The owners of the villages dock our wages. They say it ruins our traditional image and tourists won't pay." The tradition of neck elongation goes back far into history, but the tradition of young people questioning tradition goes back even further. And while neck elongation is still practiced in many places, younger women are increasingly starting to push back against the tradition. In the Kayan Lahui tribe, for example, many young women are choosing to remove their rings, despite the discomfort and the neck weakness that can sometimes result. Inspired by the younger generation, some older women are choosing to remove their rings as well. So what do you think? Would you ever consider neck elongation? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.